Welcome, everybody, this evening to our meeting about fiscal sustainability. I want to invite up our Mayor, Dion Bailey, to say a few words.
Thank you, City Manager Hall, and for staff for putting this meeting together this evening. I just wanted to say welcome to our residents, and thank you for taking the time to tune in and to come in to learn about our city finances. I think it's a great idea. The city dollars and cents funding the future. Before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the past. I'll just talk for a minute or so about what I experienced when I came into the city. I was elected in 2018, and in 2019 we learned that we had some debt associated with Department of Finance loans, et cetera. And these are in the millions of dollars. Since being on council, the council that I've been part of has gotten that debt paid off. That was approximately $3 million. We had some loans that totaled nearly $5 million. And our staff, City Manager Hall and his team, have been working diligently to do that. So those are some things that we're proud of, that we've made progress on over the last several years. And again, that's the past. The exciting thing is we're looking towards our future. And so I'm happy to be here today to learn more about this with you, our residents. Thank you very much.
So if I didn't say before, I'm Dante Hall. I'm your city manager for this great city, for the city of Hercules, and thank everybody for being here and for tuning in. The goal of this meeting tonight is really to discuss the state of our city finances. And during the presentation, we're going to give you an insight to some of our long-term financial trends. We're going to talk about some of our challenges that we have coming up that we're facing in the near future, and then discuss some possible revenue enhancement strategies that the city could evaluate in the future to gain financial stability. So we'll run through this brief presentation. Edwin is going to be taking the lion's share of the presentation to talk about the trends. And then we're going to reserve some time for anyone who has questions to state those questions and get some feedback from you. I think the most important part of this meeting that I wanted to make sure the public understood is that no decisions are going to be made tonight. This is really just an informational meeting. And also to give an opportunity for people to provide feedback and comments. And then once we conclude this meeting, our next step is to go to City Council with a study session to talk about this information and then receive direction of next steps about what we should do essentially about financial planning and what we want to do in the future. As you know, the people who are here, we're recording this tonight. And we're recording it so we can share it with other people who can't join us this evening. When we get the comments and questions for the agenda part, if you have questions, we're going to ask you to come up so we can capture it on the camera, and the mics can also pick up the meeting for you. So thanks for being here. Let's turn to our next slide. Some of the key points is that the city values and prioritizes our long-term financial sustainability planning. And it's clear because that's why we're here tonight, because we understand that there are some challenges ahead, and we need to start planning for those in a way that's organized and reasonable. Despite our balanced budget, we have some long-term challenges that threaten our stability, and Edwin is going to talk a little bit more about those. The rising cost of infrastructure repairs and services are beginning to outpace our revenues. And so pretty soon they're going to catch up, and it's going to be really paper thin. If there is any type of economic downturn or what have you, there's going to be some difficulty in dealing with that. The other kind of fact is that 80% of our general fund revenues, which is our fund that it's unrestricted, is made up or tied to economic trends. It's really just a few businesses, essentially, that contribute to a large part of our general fund revenue. And as they go, we go. If they go out of business, that means a huge impact for us. So there's no diversification of our revenue base. The other thing that we wanted to talk about tonight is that we're a low property tax-based city. So we only receive about 5% of the 1% property tax base, where other cities, typically they receive the whole 1% of the tax base. We receive 5% of the 1%. And that's a little bit unusual, but it contributes to our challenges. And like I talked about before, our largest revenue source is tied to a few businesses. And lastly, our strategic revenue generation funding plans are essential for our sustainability. And that's the goal. That's what we want to achieve, is financial sustainability, is what we're looking for. Next slide. So this chart represents our 5-year forecast of the city's general fund. And we're going to focus a lot on the general fund because that is the fund where we pay for most of our things. We have other funds that are restricted for specific uses, but this is really the fund that funds most of your services that you enjoy in the community. So we'll focus on that. Edwin will get a little bit deeper into the details a little bit later during the presentation about other funds that support our operations. But our main fund, the general fund, this year the budget was about $19.8 million. And if you can see in the chart, you have a green line and you have a blue line. The green line is our revenues, and the blue line are our expenditures. This forecast is really based on assumptions of ongoing costs in the city and a modest growth. We have about a 3% growth that is built in each year for our expenditures and revenues. You'll see the spikes in the year of 25-26, which is next year, the blue spike and the green spike. And what those represent are, we anticipate some loan repayments. We had some affordable housing loans that the city in the past was obligated to pay or repay. And so you see essentially a spike up in our expenditures, but we also got some one-time money, some earmarked money from our legislators to help with that. And so we're going to be utilizing that money essentially to balance out the budget. But those are the spikes essentially that you see in our revenues and expenditures in 25-26 and a little bit in 26-27 as well, because it spans over 2 years, because there are two payments essentially. And so, like I said, we're going to be mitigating those gaps by using our one-time reserves. But if the point this chart is trying to make essentially is you see pretty quickly that our revenues are catching up with our expenditures. Usually there's a little bit of room, as you can see in 24-25 and 25-26, where we're not spending all of the money. Still, we're still reserving just a little bit. But as the chart progresses and the years progress, you'll see essentially that we have revenues and expenditures are pretty much even. And as time goes on, you might see expenditures overtake the revenues that we're able to generate. And the cost of goods and services, like I said, is growing. And so that gap is going to be paper thin. It's going to be thinner and thinner. And like I mentioned before, there's little room for economic uncertainty. If businesses leave, we get an economic downturn. Without any reserves or without one-time money, we'd be in a challenging situation, essentially. So there's a need for strategic planning and figuring out what we will do long-term about the city's sustainability and our budget. Next slide. So this is an old chart that a lot of city managers use, but it's really our financial alignment strategies. And these are the typical strategies that cities use when they're addressing budget challenges. They can cut, essentially, spend less. Now, while this might get you to the expenditure point where you want to be to match your budget, you'll need to adjust service levels a lot of times, or you'll need to make choices of priorities. Are you going to provide roads repairs, or are you going to provide programs for children and seniors? There's a priority kind of choice that the community has to make. But that is a common strategy that's used to kind of deal with budget challenges. The second leg of that stool is using reserves to fill the revenue gap. While this is a strategy that will work temporarily, reserves are really considered one-time money, and you can't really utilize them for ongoing expenditures. When it's gone, it's gone. And so we have a limited amount of that. We can continue to use that. Pretty soon it's going to be gone, and we're going to be in the same position that we were in. And Edwin will talk a little bit more about that in our next slide. The third leg to that stool is new revenue, and looking at strategies to generate additional revenue to really steady our revenue streams so that we're not dependent upon a few businesses for our general fund or something. We have a lot more flexibility in income streams that are coming into the city's coffers for us to provide services to the community. So those are pretty much the main points. I want to turn it over to Edwin, and he's going to continue the presentation and walk us through the rest of the presentation, and then we'll take some questions and just have a discussion amongst the community about our city's budget. So I'll invite you up, Edwin.
Thank you, City Manager Hall. Good evening. I'm Edwin Gatto, your Finance Director, and I'm going to continue on the presentation that the City Manager have left off. If I get there. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, this is to talk about that three-legged stool that the City Manager had mentioned earlier. This is kind of like a detail of it. So understanding the distinction between one-time solution, a deferred solution, and a sustainable solution. So a one-time solution effectively addresses immediate challenges. However, they do not provide a resolution for ongoing issues. Deferral postpones the problem, and then a sustainable solution solves our ongoing budget challenges. So during the fiscal crisis in the city implemented a one-time financial strategy to address unexpected significant expenses resulting from the loss of redevelopment money. So this approach involved delaying essential infrastructure, essentially maintenance, to satisfy immediate operational needs. Moving forward, the city must create a sustainable solution that promotes a balanced strategy, ensuring our communities can thrive in the long term. Next slide, please. So here's the mechanics of local government revenue in hindsight. So local government revenues primarily come from taxes imposed within their jurisdiction. This includes property tax, sales tax, utility users, and other revenues, and also users' fee for services provided by local government. These funds are essential for financing a variety of local services, such as public safety, infrastructure development, parks and recreation, and administrative function. The city uses fund accounting. What it is to manage resources through designated funding source that reflect specific limitations set by the providers. So the main focus tonight is the general fund, because that's primarily the operating funds of the city. It covers ongoing expenditures from revenues generated by taxes, fees, and other sources. It is vital for essential government operations, including public safety, street maintenance, community services, and administrative function. Next slide, please. Oh, I'll stay on that slide. I'm sorry. So I'll explain, the process on local government revenue. Who pays for the local taxes received by the city, and what's the basis? So the property taxes, sales tax, and utility users tax and other taxes are paid by residents and businesses in Hercules. For example, property taxes are levied on assessed valuation of your property. Sales tax are levied on sales of goods and services, and utility users tax on the amount of utility use. Who decides on these taxes that was imposed to the resident? Most of these local taxes require the majority voter approval. which needs to go to a voter to get approved. Who collects and enforces payment? The city assumes total responsibility for the administration, assessment, collection, and enforcement of the taxes. How is it allocated? Cities retain all local taxes collected within their boundaries. For instance, property tax revenues are collected by the county based on the assessed value of the properties, and these revenues are then sent to the city twice a year, one in December and April. The state is also responsible for handling sales tax revenue, collecting them for retailers, and transferring them to the city on a monthly basis. Next slide, please. So general fund revenues, where does the money come from? The city general fund revenue mainly comes from the local taxes, which are vital for funding essential services. This includes sales tax, utility users tax on water and electricity, and property tax based on property values. The fund also receives fees in lieu of vehicle license fee and users fee for certain municipal services. Around 80% of these revenues derive from taxes, emphasizing the importance of taxation for the city's financial stability and its capacity to serve the community. Next slide, please. So let's talk about these two taxes here that are local tax risk and challenges to Hercules. It is important to recognize that Hercules generates most of its sales tax revenue from a small group of key operators, with a substantial portion coming from the business-to-business transactions. Notably, the top 3 contributors accounts for over 50% of the city's total sales tax revenue. As City Manager Hall mentioned earlier, if one of these businesses were to leave the city, it will lead to a significant loss in tax revenue, resulting in substantial cuts into city services. It is also important to note that Hercules receives only 5% of the base property tax rate, considerably lower than other jurisdictions that typically collect the entire property tax rate. Next slide, please. General fund expenditures, where does the money go? The general fund revenues are primarily used to enhance public safety and improve community security, which represent about 48 cents of a dollar. Right? They are also critical for maintaining and upgrading public infrastructure through important public works projects, which is not that significant. It's only 2% is generated from general fund. These funds also supports community development and economic growth, which represents 5%. And then additionally, they ensure that essential administrative function runs smoothly, allowing the city to effectively meet the needs of its community. And it's also funding the Parks and Recreation facility, which is heavily funded by user fees. Next slide, please. So factors that may lead to financial difficulties for the city includes whatever is in the slides here. Also, the continuous depletion of financial reserve due to excessive spending, which weakens the city's ability to handle unexpected challenges. Poor practices in developing and monitoring budgets, resulting in lack of foresight and control over financial resources. The lack of formal financial recovery plan, leaving the cities unprepared to effectively navigate economic downturns or fiscal crisis. Next. So we look at and analyze the city's needs assessment, and this is are the highlights of the assessment that we assess that the city needs. Unfunded critical infrastructure need. It includes building and maintaining roads and other transportation infrastructure, maintaining the city's sewer system, building and renovating public facility. The rising cost of goods, services, and utilities due to inflation. Our 5-year forecast only accounts for 3% CPI inflation. If that is more than the 3%, then our expenditures will be, outpacing revenues. So also the challenges in the city is also the employee retention and deferred maintenance. Next slide. Taxes. Taxes are crucial for funding public services that benefit the community, such as infrastructure, education, healthcare, and public safety. While there are not always direct correlation between what individuals pay and benefits they receive, this system supports essential services for everyone. Cities can impose any tax not prohibited by state law, giving them flexibility in governance and funding under Government Code Section 37100.5. All local taxes are either general taxes or special tax. General taxes revenue may be used for any purpose, such as general government services. In contrast, special tax revenues can only be used or restricted for a specific purpose. Next slide, please. In California, the process for passing tax measures is governed by specific voter approval requirements outlined in the state constitution. General taxes, which are typically used to fund essential public services and programs, require the approval of a simple majority of voters. In contrast, special taxes and general obligation bond, which are often designed for specific projects or programs, require a higher threshold of approval. A 2/3 majority of voters are required. Next. So we'll talk about what are additional tax initiatives that we can put in the ballot that will increase the general fund revenue. The city can increase its revenue by raising the sales tax from 9.25% to a threshold that the county set at 9.75%, potentially generating an extra $2 million a year. Hercules Real Property Transfer Tax, RPTT, is 55 cents per thousand currently of property value. Only charter cities can increase this tax. So Hercules will need to become a charter city to raise the rate. A $1 increase in the RPTT could yield about $245,000 more based on the recent property sales value annually. And utility users tax is currently at 8% and contributes around $4 million annually to the general fund. A 1% increase could generate an additional $500,000 each year. Alternatively, we can issue bond measures to fund our infrastructure need. The general obligation, one option is the general obligation bonds, are municipal bonds that fund community projects. They are backed by the city's ability to collect taxes for repayment. GO bond supports public facility, highway improvements, parks, public safety projects, and other capital needs. The other one that doesn't require a voter's approval is a lease revenue bonds. The difference between the lease revenue bonds and the general obligation bonds is that they depend on specific sources of repayment, such as sales tax, right? Essentially, city assets like city halls and police station must have an insured value that is equal to or greater than the amount of the bond. What it means is, for instance, a $10 million bond requires a $10 million worth of lease asset. The repayments of these bonds come from the general fund, which links the city's credit worthiness to the bonds. Typically, the credit rating of the general fund is lower than the general obligation bonds, leading to higher interest rates for lease revenue bonds. Additionally, voter approval is not required for lease revenue bonds. So voter approval timeline. A tax initiative is required by voter. There are two options for election dates. On the date of the next regular council election, that is not less than 88 days after the council meeting at which the petition is certified, or on a special election date that is between 88 and 103 days after the council meeting at which the petition is certified. With that, we're open to questions. Thank you.
And thank you, Edwin. It was a brief presentation, but it gives you kind of an overview of where we're going, some of our challenges. Our most significant challenges are really kind of our critical infrastructure. There's less and less money available for roads, and we have some roads that need some dire attention in our city. There are services and service levels that I know before kind of the disbanding of redevelopment and the city's challenges in the early 2000s and 2010s. The city hasn't fully recovered from a lot of that, and a lot of services were cut. We're not able to actually pay for and restore those service levels to where they were because we have reduced revenues, essentially. And so really what it's going to take for us in the future is really being strategic about what enhanced revenue opportunities are available to us, essentially, and how do we plan for what we want to do in the future. Now, we have some major projects, development projects that are on the books, essentially, but we can't act alone. Those require partnerships with developers. A lot of things are really dictated by economic trends. What are interest rates to borrow money? That has a big impact on whether things get built and when things get built. But as you can see, if the main takeaway we'd like people to take away from this presentation is that we are paper thin. And if there is a blip or something that happens, essentially, we would have a challenge in really meeting whatever the budget gap or deficit that would create. So with that, we will take any questions that we have. Does anybody have any questions at all or any comments? Okay. Great. So like we said, we will make this recording available to people, and we're going to be having a city council meeting where the public can also make comments. We'll be talking about some of the information that you saw tonight, and then the council has asked us to come back and talk about revenue enhancement opportunities. And we'll have a full public discourse about that, and then council will provide us with direction about where we go next and next steps. Okay? With that, thank you guys very much, and I definitely appreciate your attention.